A tent costs $180 at Walmart. Decker Vane spent $80 at a sign shop and never needed the tent. That's what this is about. Decker was 22 when he built the thing. He'd been sleeping outside for 14 months, sometimes under the overpass on the edge of Sacramento's downtown corridor, where the concrete columns gave you just enough shadow to stay out of sight, sometimes in a parking structure off L Street when the security wasn't cycling through on their usual schedule. He had a sleeping bag, a backpack, and a tarp he'd gotten from a church giveaway that didn't quite cover him when the rain came sideways. He wasn't new to any of this. He knew which shelters had bed bugs, which churches gave food without requiring a service first, which park bathrooms stayed unlocked until 10, and which ones the city had started padlocking at dusk. He knew the difference between a night that was manageable and a night that wasn't, and he'd been spending more nights than he wanted in the second category. That winter, the one where it rained 11 straight days in January, he stopped accepting that as just how things were. Here's what he didn't have: tools, a car, a storage unit, a friend with a truck, any of the things that every YouTube build video assumes you have sitting in your garage or your driveway. He had a utility knife, a backpack, and a library card. The library card was the one that mattered. Here's what he found: a Hexayurt. Most people have never heard that word. It sounds like something from a desert music festival, which is partly where it came from. An open-source shelter design that an engineer named Vinay Gupta developed in the early 2000s for disaster relief situations where people needed shelter fast for materials that were easy to source. The design is public domain. No patent, no license, nothing to buy before you can use it. The geometry was documented in PDFs that anyone could download, and the version Decker eventually built used one material, required no frame, needed no tools beyond the knife he already carried, and came in at $81 total. He didn't find it because he was unusually resourceful. He found it because he spent 3 hours on a library computer in a cold January rain looking for anything that wasn't a tent he couldn't afford, and this was what the search turned up. The first thing to understand about Decker is that he's not particularly handy. He'll tell you that himself without any ceremony around it, just as a fact, the same way he'd tell you he can't drive stick or read music. He grew up in Fresno, moved to Sacramento at 19 with a guy from high school, split the deposit on a 2-bedroom apartment near Florin Road, and watched the whole thing fall apart in 6 months when his roommate bailed on the lease without telling him. After that, a cousin's couch for 3 weeks, rotating shelters, and eventually a wait list for a navigation center bed that kept telling him to come back next week. He stopped calling after 4 months. He's not a builder. His hands are calloused from carrying a heavy pack and sleeping on concrete, not from working with materials. He'd never built anything larger than an IKEA shelf. What he is practical in a specific way. He doesn't do things that don't work. He'd built 2 cardboard shelters before the Hexayurt. The first collapsed in 4 hours. The second lasted 1 night before the rain turned it to pulp. He wasn't going to try a third. So he was looking for something that actually worked, looking the way you look when you're out of other options, carefully and without patience for anything that cost money he didn't have. The Hexayurt, as he first read about it on a library computer, seemed like it was for people with a lot more going on than him. The standard version is built from 8 sheets of polyiso foam board, the pink or silver insulated stuff, taped together with a specific structural tape called bidirectional filament tape, or bit tape. It forms a hexagonal base with a folded roof. The geometry of it is the whole trick. It's a shape that holds itself up, no frame, no lumber, no screws, just flat panels connected at angles that distribute the load. The problem for Decker: polyiso foam board runs about $30 a sheet if you're buying new. 8 sheets is $240 before tape. That's not $80. That's not even close to $80. He almost closed the tab. Then he found a thread, an old forum post, the kind with a timestamp from 2011 and a grainy photo, where someone had built a half Hexayurt from corrugated plastic sheets. The kind you see in yard signs. The kind sign shops have sitting in stacks of offcuts, That changed things. Corrugated plastic, sometimes called coroplast, though that's a brand name, is the material yard signs are made from. Political campaign signs, real estate signs, event directionals. Sign shops produce a lot of it. They generate offcuts on every job, and most of them pay to dispose of what they can't use. The material is two thin plastic sheets with hollow channels between them, rigid in one direction, flexible in the other. Fully waterproof, a full 4 by 8 foot sheet weighs about 1.5 pounds. It doesn't insulate. That's the main difference from foam board, which the standard Hexayurt plans call for. Foam board has measurable thermal resistance. Corrugated plastic has almost none. Touch it on a cold night, and it's cold on your hand. It stops wind and water. It does not stop cold coming through. Decker knew that before he started. Sacramento's winters run cold and wet, but rarely brutal. More 35 degrees and raining than 15 in ice. With his sleeping bag in a covered location, the trade-off worked. He wasn't building for a Minnesota January. He was building for rain that kept soaking through his tarp. And for that, waterproofing was the thing that mattered most. He asked 4 sign shops over 2 days. The first had nothing wider than 18 inches, too small for panels. The second said they recycled everything. The third wanted $6 a sheet, which was too high if he needed 10 or 12. The fourth, a shop on Arden Way that handled real estate and event signage, had a stack of misprints and color rejects in the back. The owner looked at Decker for a second, looked at the stack, and said, $4 a sheet. Decker asked if he could take 12. The owner said yes. That's $48 for the panels. He also needed tape. Bit tape, bidirectional filament tape, is what holds the design together, not duct tape, not packing tape. The filaments running through it in 2 directions give it tensile strength you need when tape joints are load-bearing. It doesn't stretch. It bonds to plastic the way duct tape doesn't. Bit tape online runs $20 to $26 a roll. Decker didn't have a delivery address. A hardware store carried it for $31 a roll. He bought 2, thinking he'd use both. Total, $48 in panels, plus $62 in tape. $110 combined, $30 over what he had. He went back to the sign shop, explained he'd miscounted, and got the owner down to $3 a sheet for 10 instead of 12. Panels, $30. 2 rolls of tape, $62. Total, $92. Still over. He returned 1 tape roll, found he didn't have quite enough to finish all the seams with. 1 roll, went back and bought a third, used about a third of it. His final total, $81. He counted it twice on the concrete next to his pack and was annoyed about the extra dollar but kept going. The design he was working from is a modified half Hexayurt, not the full standing version, which would have been too large and too visible. He wanted something that sat low, fit under the overhang of the space he was using, and could theoretically be broken down and moved if he needed to clear out fast. The half Hexayurt gives you a floor plan that's roughly hexagonal, with walls that angle inward to a flat or slightly pitched roof. The full version is taller, a real shelter you stand up in. The half version has walls around 4 feet high at the peak. You're not standing up in it, but you're sitting comfortably and you can sleep full length without your feet hitting the wall. The geometry is what makes the whole thing possible without tools. A hexagon's interior angles are 120 degrees. When you take flat panels and tape them together at specific angles, they lock into a shape that doesn't want to fall over. The panels push against each other. That tension is structural. You're not building a frame and covering it. The panels are the frame and the cover at the same time. Decker's version used 10 sheets total, 6 for the walls, arranged in a hexagonal loop, 4 for the roof panels, angled inward, and taped at the ridge. The floor he left as bare concrete. He had a foam sleeping pad already that handled insulation from the ground. Before he touched the tape, he scored the fold lines with a utility knife he already owned. Scoring corrugated plastic means cutting through the top layer and the internal ribs without going all the way through. It creates a flex point. When you fold along a score line, The panel bends cleanly instead of cracking or buckling. He practiced on a scrap piece first. It took 3 tries before the fold was clean enough. The first assembly attempt happened in a parking lot behind a grocery store on a Sunday morning, early, when the foot traffic was lowest. He'd chosen that location because it was flat, it had space to lay out all 10 panels at once, and it was far enough from the entrance that nobody was likely to tell him to leave before he finished. He laid all the panels out on the concrete first, oriented the way they'd go together, and looked at them for a few minutes before starting. The wall sections needed to go together in a specific sequence. Tape the wrong pair first, and you end up with a ring that won't fold flat. And a ring that won't fold flat is a ring you can't transport. The forum post had been specific about this, with a diagram that Decker had hand-copied onto the inside cover of a small notebook he carried. He followed the diagram. He connected the 6 wall panels at their vertical seams, running bit tape along the full height of each joint. He kept the tape angle just slightly loose, not fully pressed flat, which allowed the joint to act as a hinge. That's the whole trick to the collapsible version. Hinged seams. When you fold the ring, the taped seams fold with it. When you open it, the seams pull taut, and the ring holds its shape. The wall ring went up at about 30 minutes once he'd understood the sequence. He stood it up, walked around it, pushed on 2 opposite sides. It held. The hexagon shape was obvious even without the roof. 6 panels forming a closed loop, each one pressed slightly against its neighbors, the whole thing standing on its own without anything holding it up from outside. The roof panels were harder. The standard half Hexayurt roof comes from 4 panels cut and arranged to form a shallow pitch over the hexagonal opening. In the foam board version, you score and fold the panels to a precise angle and the shape holds itself. In corrugated plastic, the score and fold technique works, but getting the angle right took Decker 3 practice scores on a spare piece before he trusted himself to do it on a real panel. The angle the roof panels needed, tilted inward about 30 degrees from horizontal, had to be held in place while the tape set. He didn't have clamps. He used his knee against the underside of the panel to hold the angle, pressed the tape with his palm, and held steady until the adhesive set. Bit tape sets fast on a clean, dry surface. He'd wiped every seam area with a piece of his old shirt before starting. The first roof panel took 11 minutes to get set. He got faster. The third roof panel went on wrong. He'd been rushing. It was almost noon and the parking lot was getting busier, and he set the panel at the wrong approach angle. When he pressed the tape and stepped back, the ridge where that panel met its neighbor was offset by about 2 inches. The tape was already set. He peeled it. Bit tape comes off plastic with effort, and it loses some adhesion each time you peel and repress. Repositioned the panel, cut a fresh piece of tape, and re-adhered. That joint is the one, across 6 weeks of use, that he was never fully confident in. He put a second reinforcing strip on the inside face of it. It held. When the last roof panel seated and he stepped back, the structure was standing. He pushed on it from 3 directions. It moved, flexed at the joints, rocked slightly on the concrete, and came back to shape each time. That flex is not a weakness in the corrugated plastic. It's built into the material. A fully rigid structure, hit hard enough, cracks. A structure with flex in its joints absorbs and returns. He didn't know that going in. He figured it out by pushing on it in a grocery store parking lot on a Sunday morning and watching the thing refuse to fall over. He moved it to the spot under the overpass the next morning, a Tuesday in early February. 2 trips carrying it. He set the Hexayurt back against the concrete wall, so 3 of its 6 sides were against or near solid surfaces. The opening, a gap he'd left between 2 wall panels, faced inward toward a column, which meant wind had to make a 90-degree turn to enter. It doesn't stop wind. It slows it. The first night, Sacramento dropped to 38 degrees. He had his sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees and a wool blanket from a shelter supply drop. Inside the Hexayurt, with the opening partially blocked by his pack, the wind stopped. The panels were cold to the touch. The plastic doesn't insulate, but the absence of wind changed how the cold felt against him in a way he hadn't anticipated. The second night it rained. The overpass kept the direct rainfall off, but runoff dripped off the concrete edge in a line about 3 feet out from the wall. His opening faced toward that drip line. He pulled the shelter back, angled the opening away, and wedged folded cardboard under the gap where the wall met concrete to stop water tracking underneath. The interior stayed dry, not completely dry. His sleeping bag got damp on the far end where it touched a panel, but dry enough. That was the whole point. Dry enough. The thing about sleeping outside that most people don't track is that cold and wet together are a different problem than either one alone. You can manage 35 degrees with a good sleeping bag. You can manage wet if it's 55 and you're moving. Put 35 degrees and wet together, and you're in trouble faster than people think. Decker had been close to hypothermia once before, a night the previous November where his tarp failed and he spent 6 hours in wet gear and woke up shaking so hard he bit his tongue. The Hexayurt didn't heat the space. It held it. When you stop the wind and keep the rain off, your body heat stays in the air around you. A 6 by 6 foot hexagonal space, which is roughly what the half Hexayurt gives you inside, is small enough that one person's body heat moves the temperature in that space by several degrees over the course of a night. He didn't have a thermometer. He doesn't know the exact numbers. What he knows is that he stopped sleeping in wet gear after he had the structure. He also stopped carrying the tarp. The tarp weighed about 2 pounds and took up a third of his pack. With the Hexayurt broken down into its carry configuration, it weighed more, closer to 12 pounds, but it replaced the tarp, his emergency bivvy, and the cardboard he'd been using under his sleeping bag. Net pack weight didn't change much. What changed was what he was carrying. A tarp and a sheet of cardboard are emergency measures. The Hexayurt is a structure. He lived in it for 6 weeks. Not continuously. Sacramento's encampment enforcement runs on a loose cycle that the people who've been on the streets long enough know how to track. Decker knew the schedule for the overpass corridor. He knew which mornings to expect officers and which mornings they'd be working a different zone. On the mornings he expected a sweep, he broke the shelter down before 6 a.m. and moved it. That routine meant he got very good at the breakdown. By week 2, he could collapse the wall ring, lift the roof panels off, stack everything and have the ground clear in under 25 minutes. By week 3, it was under 20. The trick was doing it in the right order. Roof panels first. Each one leaned against the column. Then the wall ring folded, accordion style. If he tried to fold the ring before removing the roof panels pinched the fold and stressed the joints. He learned that on day 3 when he heard a tape seam creak and stopped. Setup was slower. He never got it below 40 minutes because he'd learned, after the first week, to be careful about which panels went in which sequence and to wipe each joint surface before taping a repair. The more he handled the structure, the more he understood which joints were load-bearing in ways the others weren't. 4 joints failed across the 6 weeks. 2 were roof joints, both at the ridge line, the place where 2 roof panels met at the highest point. That's where water pooled when it rained. The weight was small but constant, and the joint was under tension, not just pressure. The panels wanted to spread apart, and the tape was what held them. He'd expected this, or something like it. He retaped both with fresh bit tape, added interior strips, and didn't have another roof joint failure after that. The 2 wall failures were at the base seams, where the wall panels met the concrete. Those joints had been flexing every time he broke down and set up the structure, and eventually the tape adhesive fatigued at the point where the seam hit the concrete edge. He found a hardware store that stocked wide aluminum HVAC tape, the shiny stuff used for sealing ductwork, and reinforced the base of every wall joint with it. HVAC tape is stiffer than bit tape, doesn't flex the same way, and the aluminum backing holds up better against the moisture that comes off concrete. It cost $8 for the roll. If he built it again, he'd use HVAC tape on the base seams from the start, bit tape on everything from a foot above the ground up. That's the material split he didn't know going in, and figured out by failing. The panels themselves held without any replacements. Corrugated plastic absorbs impact differently than you'd expect. He dragged one across concrete during a rushed breakdown. It scraped the surface, left a white scratch mark, and kept going. He stepped on a roof panel by accident. One morning, full weight on one foot, and the panel dented under his heel but didn't crack. He seated it back in position, and the joint still fit. The dent was visible, but the geometry was unaffected. That toughness is in the structure of the material. Solid panels hit hard enough, crack through. The channels in corrugated plastic give the impact somewhere to go. The energy deforms the channel instead of fracturing the face. It's not indestructible, but it holds up to the kind of handling that 6 weeks of daily breakdown and setup requires. Here's what the Hexayurt doesn't do, and Decker is clear about this. It doesn't handle sustained heavy wind. A structure taped together with no mechanical fasteners, resting on a concrete surface with no staking, will move if the wind is strong enough. He had one night where a storm pushed through and the wall ring shifted 2 feet. He woke up and pushed it back and blocked the base with his pack and a piece of concrete rubble he'd placed there for exactly that reason. The thing didn't blow away, but it moved. If you're in an exposed location, no overpass, no wall, no windbreak, the corrugated plastic Hexayurt is less stable than a well-staked tent. That's the honest comparison. A staked tent in a sheltered spot will outperform this in wind. The Hexayurt wins on rain, on wind protection, when you have a structure to place it against, on the absence of a floor that traps moisture, and on the fact that you can build it for less than half the cost of a decent tent. It also doesn't lock. That's obvious, but worth saying. Decker kept his most important things on him or inside his sleeping bag. The Hexayurt is visible to anyone walking past. It is not private in the way a room is private. It's a marker. When he was inside it, he felt safer from the elements than he ever had sleeping outside. He felt about the same as always regarding everything else. By the end of February, he'd connected with a navigation center, one of the city-funded transitional housing programs, and got a bed. He broke the Hexayurt down for the last time on a Thursday morning and left the panels stacked against the concrete column. He left a note on top of the stack, written in marker on a piece of the cardboard he'd been using as a base layer: "Panels work, need bit tape, free." He doesn't know if anyone used them. He'd been at the navigation center for 3 days when he thought to go back and check, and by then the stack was gone. He prefers to think someone took them and figured it out. The bit tape, what was left of the second roll, he kept. He still has it. He keeps it in his pack even now, more than a year later, because it's the kind of thing where you want to have it and not need it, rather than need it and not have it. The question, if you've spent time sleeping outside, is whether this is replicable, whether the sign shop thing actually works, or whether it depends on hitting the right person on the right day in the right city. It's real, but it has limits. Sign shops generate offcut plastic constantly. The material costs them money to dispose of, so most are willing to move it. Some give it away. Others sell at a few dollars a sheet. A few say no, usually the ones that have had a bad experience before. The approach matters. Decker was direct about what he was building. He didn't describe it vaguely or dodge the fact that he was homeless. The owner who said yes knew exactly what the panels were for. Vague requests get vague answers. The tape is harder to improvise. Decker tested duct tape on one joint during the first assembly. It held 4 days and then peeled. The adhesive on duct tape doesn't bond to smooth plastic the way bit tape does. Bit tape is designed for non-porous surfaces. The filaments give it tensile strength in all directions. There's no real substitute for it in this application. If you're starting from zero with no cash, the panels can potentially be free. And the tape is the barrier. Some Habitat for Humanity restore locations and community tool libraries carry building tape. Worth asking before assuming the cost is fixed. The total Decker spent $81. One roll of bit tape used almost entirely, one roll used about a third of the way, one roll of aluminum HVAC tape used mostly for the base reinforcement, 12 sheets of corrugated plastic, though he only used 10 and left 2 as spares. Utility knife he already owned, rag for cleaning surfaces, which was a piece of his old shirt, $81 and a library computer, and 3 hours of reading. That's it. That's the whole cost. The Hexayurt design exists because someone decided that shelter geometry should be public information. The original foam board version is documented in detail. There are PDFs, there are YouTube builds, there are forums with questions that go back 15 years. None of that documentation was made for Decker specifically. It was made for disaster response, for off-grid homesteaders, for festival campers. He found it because he needed it. And he looked. What he did with corrugated plastic instead of foam board is not a new idea either. People have been substituting materials in that design for years. The trade-off is always the same: cheaper and more portable, but less insulating. For someone in a covered location with a good sleeping bag, that trade-off is fine. For someone without a covered location in a cold climate, foam board would be worth the extra cost if they can source it. Decker's situation, overhang, concrete wall, Sacramento's mildish winters, was close to the best case for this version of the build. He knows that. He's not saying it works everywhere. He's saying it worked there for 6 weeks for $81, and that he slept dry through 11 more days of rain. What stays with you about this isn't the geometry or the tape or the $81. It's the timeline. He found the design on a Tuesday. He spent that afternoon at the library reading forum posts and downloading PDFs on the public computer while it rained outside. He found the sign shop on Thursday, not the first one, not the second to fourth. He bought the bit tape on Friday morning. He assembled the whole thing Saturday morning in a grocery store parking lot. He slept in it Saturday night. 5 days from the library computer to a structure over his head. No contractor, no permit, no wait list, no caseworker who needed to approve a form before anything could move, no inspection, no deposit, no background check, no one telling him to come back next week. 5 days, $81, and a fold sequence he'd worked out from a forum post with a photo that looked like it was taken on a phone from 2009. The navigation center that eventually gave him a bed had a 6-week wait list when he put his name in. He'd signed up the same week he found the Hexayurt design, on the same day at the library. He got to the top of the list 39 days after he first applied. He'd been sleeping in the Hexayurt for 34 of those 39 days. He made it 39 days drier and in better condition than he would have been otherwise. Not warmer in any dramatic sense. Corrugated plastic is not insulation, but dry, and that mattered more than the temperature at that point. He'd been managing cold. Cold he knew how to manage. Wet on top of cold was the thing he'd been losing to. 39 days where he didn't soak through his sleeping bag. 39 days where he woke up with dry gear and enough energy to think about the next thing. That's what the $81 in 5 days bought him. Not a solution, not a housing placement, just the ability to stay functional while the system that was supposed to help him moved at the speed it moves. If you've spent a night outside and you felt that math, the internal calculation that runs at 2 a.m., where you're tracking your core temperature and estimating how many hours until it's light enough to walk around and get warm, then you know why 5 days and $81 matters. It's not impressive compared to a house. It's not impressive compared to a heated shelter. It's impressive compared to a church giveaway tarp that doesn't cover your feet and a January that doesn't care. That's the comparison, not the Hexayurt against an apartment or a hotel or anything else. The Hexayurt against what Decker had before it, which was a tarp and a sleeping bag and 11 straight days of rain and no good answer. The design still exists. Vinay Gupta's original documentation is still online. The open-source Hexayurt has been built in disaster zones and refugee camps and festivals and backyards and parking lots. The geometry hasn't changed. The math still holds. Sign shops still have corrugated plastic in stacks in the back. Bit tape still costs around $25 to $31 a roll depending on where you're buying it. None of this is new information that Decker found. He found old information. He found it because he needed it and looked, which sounds obvious until you've spent time in a situation where looking takes energy you don't always have. He's 23 now. He has a room in a shared transitional housing unit. 4 guys, 1 bathroom, a kitchen they all take turns using. He has a part-time job doing warehouse receiving at a distribution center in West Sacramento. 4 days a week, early shifts. He's on a waiting list for a studio apartment in a city where the waiting lists for affordable units are longer than the wait list for the navigation center ever was. He still has the BIT tape, the partial roll he didn't use on the Hexayurt. It's in his pack, in the same side pocket where he's always kept it. He carries it because he learned the difference between having it and not having it. Not because he thinks he'll need it, because he knows he might, and because the distance between those two things is smaller than most people think, and closer than he'd ever want to find out again without something in his pack that works. Total build cost, $81. Panels, $30 for 10 sheets at $3 each. Bit tape, 2 rolls at $31 each, $62 total. HVAC reinforcement tape, $8 used mostly at base seams. Utility knife, already owned. Time from design to first night sleeping inside it, 5 days. That's the whole number.